Welcome, everyone. Hello. It's a pleasure to welcome you or welcome you back to the Banguoya Audio Festival and our conference. Welcome to the second day and the first session of the second day, which is called Sound Design Simplified. Before we get into the session and I get to introduce our guest, our speaker for today, I want to go over several very simple technical things before the conference. So all of the information about the sessions, the speakers, the events, and also the program of audio stories and podcasts that the festival presents this year. Everything can be found on the website banguoja.lt. That's banguoja.lt. So be sure to check it out. You can also find the sessions of last year's conference there too. I did not introduce myself. My name is Agnė Pakšytė. I will be moderating the session today. And I will also be moderating the Q&A at the end of the session, which is why it's important that you let us know what you would like to know. Let us know what questions you have. And to do that, you can use the Q&A tool, which is at the bottom, usually at the bottom of the screen, to chat bubbles and Q&A. So you can enter your questions there. Please feel free to type them in Lithuanian or English, whichever works better for you. And we will make sure to address these questions at the end of the session. Before we start, we also want to ask you to wear headphones for the session, and that's important for sound quality and to hear the subtle differences in audio that will be presented. So if you have the opportunity, it's worth the while to put your headphones on. And without further ado, I think I can present our speaker for today. Our guest is Axel Kacoutié. They're an award-winning creator crafting sound, music, and words to revive a magic in the mundane. Their work has been featured on various TV, radio, and online platforms and curate spaces such as the Artingale and the Barbican. They're also the creative director of sound for Guardian Podcasts. Their audio story, How to Remember, is a part of this year's program with the Banguoja Festival with subtitles to Lithuanian. So also be sure to check this out. Axel, welcome. Such a pleasure to introduce you, and I give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Agnė. Thank you very much. And just to add to that, I'm very grateful to see How to Remember on the program. It's really beautiful to see it expressed in another language. And even though I can't read Lithuanian, it's just, you can almost still kind of understand it, obviously, because I've written it. But the pacing and it's just, I'm very grateful. So thank you. Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. That's right. My name is Axel Kacoutié. I am here to talk about sound and how you can, to use what I've said in the bio, revive a magic in the mundane. I kind of like to approach things my approach to things are very simple, but you set up with these things every single time. You will at least guarantee a certain standard in your mixes, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or someone who's been doing this for a long time. I hope I have something to share, which is of insight and of inspiration for you all. And to just jump straight into it, I'm going to start by sharing my screen and sharing the sound as well. And then after that, we can take it from there. So I am going to be talking about a podcast using as a demonstration for this podcast. Is called Decode. It's a Spotify original. It's a spin-off from the American series called Dissect. And the idea behind it is to pick an album and break it down, a rap album, and break it down track by track, line by line, and to see what whether it's like the breakdowns in the lyricism, how the words are written, the poetry behind it, the music production, and the historical context as to how and why these songs matter and exist. And this is our second season, and it's from an artist called Skepta, a grime artist called Skepta. And it's really nice to be able to work with this because I grew up listening to his music, and as well as others. I'm not going to pretend I was like a massive fan, but he was definitely a part of the texture growing up. His name was about for me. And yeah, it's been a real joy to break it down. And the idea for these episodes is that it starts with a prelude, a kind of introduction to kind of set the scene, set the stage. And the episode that I'm going to be breaking down for this sound design simplified is the first episode, episode 1. And I want to show how it can be lifted from the script, which is here, which I will be scrolling down while we hear the first version. We'll be talking about that, and I'll be breaking down how the thinking process is behind what the cues and the prompts are, as well as the script, as well as the direction here, what that is all about. And then after that, what I essentially do before. So this is handed over to me from our producer, Amy Bennett, for episode 1. So we've got the presenter, we've got the music clips, and we've got all types of different clips that aren't music in these 3 tracks. So how we can go from this recorded script to eventually my final mix. And I'm just going to delete this bit here and open up folders. As you can see, everything is all color-coded and organized, and this is what I mean. You start with, this is a preset that I have as well. So I open, like whenever I mix a decode episode, it is kind of the format where we have a folder for the tracks with the sound effects, for the atmosphere, for the archive clips, and for the music and any other types of effects as well. So we will break it down like that. And in fact, yeah, so we'll break it down like that. Sorry, I'm just multitasking at the same time. So we'll do this. What we'll do first of all, before we do anything else, is to kind of understand what we're working with. And all I'm going to do is play the opening sequence of this, which is just a nice little 3 minutes, if not give or take. Yeah, here we go. And then after that, yeah, so we'll listen to the raw. We'll break down what the script is saying and my thinking behind that, and how that then translates into the sound design experience that I eventually build up here. So if anyone can't hear anything, please message or shout, and we'll try and sort it out there. But I'm assuming no news is good news. So here we go.
A samurai who has no master is called a ronin. Ronin, roughly translated, is drifter or wanderer. Legend has it the ronin's doomed to wander in penance for an earlier disgrace, and through this wandering recover inner strength, find honor, balance. He's not a hungry young apprentice. Driven by ego alone, he's been around and is now at the crossroads of life, trying to find the courage, the intellect and intuition to choose the right path. But the ronin can still face battle with the agility of a younger warrior. Now listen to the opening of Konnichiwa, the 2016 LP by London MC producer Skepta. The instrumentation is East Asian. A flash of a blade sends us back to medieval Japan, realm of the samurai.
Looking for me.
Konnichiwa. Hello. Good afternoon in Japanese. But this is not Skepta saying hello for the first time. At this point, he's 33. He's been rapping for a decade. But he has been in the wilderness, spiritually, musically. Some were saying the genre closest to his heart, grime, had also lost its way. And UK rap in general is in a weird place. Electro crossover hits, watered down bars, begging cosigns from Americans, missteps. Konnichiwa is a threshold, the opening of a new portal for British rap and a triumphant return for the man who made the record. From Spotify, this is Decode, where we dig deep beneath albums, track by track, line by line, beat by beat, taking a surgeon's knife to dissect and see the inner workings of a masterpiece. I'm your host, pirate radio archivist, grime rhythm archaeologist, Kayo Chingonyi. Series 1, we analysed Dave's psychodrama. This time, say hi to Konnichiwa. This is episode 1, track 1, also entitled Konnichiwa, produced by Skepta with Rags Originale.
There we go. For any sharp ears out there, you may have noticed that the voice sounds a bit high-pitched, and that's because there's a technical issue with this session specifically. And I always forget to change it before demonstrating it. So the actual final thing doesn't sound like that. So you'll hear his actual deeper voice. But yeah, so that is a breakdown, following the script, listening to it. The first thing that I hear with this are, there's the breaths, there's the lip smacks, like a lot of that to clean up. There's also a couple of breaths also to clean up too. I'm listening to this sequence here when we have the music coming in and when he's talking over.
The instrumentation is East Asian.
I'm thinking of how can I make it flow and match up a bit more so we hear a bit of the music, and then after that Kayo coming in to say what he's saying as a voiceover over all of this. And of course there's the technical side of making sure that the volume, everything that you hear that you want to hear is there. So that's the technical side of things, to clean it up that way, which is part of the reason why organizing the mixes, it just crashed. But yeah, it's the reason why organizing the mixes is so important, because it cleans up exactly what you are looking for. I'm going to load up I know it's there. Yeah, so that's loading up there. But in the meantime, I've got a reference. So with the producers, there's a conversation that we've had in terms of like the color. So the technical side of things was the sound, the volume, making sure that you hear everything that you want to hear. And then after that, everything else is the breath, the color, the life. If the script is the skeleton, what is the body, the bones, the breathing, all the muscles, and all that kind of stuff like that. So there's that kind of conversation there. So there's a reference with how we want this to sound, which I'll play shortly. There are these kind of cues. Some of them are a bit more ambiguous than others, like transcendence. What does transcendence sound like? Of course, there are like other moments where they want things to be emphasized and broken down. This is kind of agreed depending on the producer. There's no real set way, but we found a working way. The second season in, we found that this works. And what was the one thing as well? Yeah, walking into walking sound effects that morphs into a stumbling, and suddenly we open through a portal. There are times when I'm like, okay, how's that going to sound? These things are extremely subjective too. And what I found pretty useful is referring to film examples. There may be podcasts that exist out there, but I know with my background that watching a lot of films, especially in this instance, Konnichiwa, cartoons, anime, there's a real, especially with Black culture and Japanese culture, there's a real cultural exchange. So I grew up listening to a lot of the sounds, a lot of this Japanese influence I'm very familiar with. So I knew off the top of my head that I'm gonna be playing around with that kind of cartoony type of like serious vibe. So as that, yeah, this is all here. I'm just gonna make sure that this plays as well again. Okay, cool. There we go.
Around.
There we go.
And is now at the crossroads of
cheap voice. Deep voice there is not cheap at all. So the first thing that we're gonna break down as a reference is the dialogue. Can it sound like this, for example? I'm like, okay, let's have a listen to this then and see what this is doing.
Return to the vanished kingdoms of ancient times. Journey through a lost empire of mad wizards and barbaric passions.
And so on and so forth. Sorry, I should have said that there were some quite violent scenes in there. I should have said sorry. But you kind of get an idea. It's a bit old school. It's coming out through a TV, or kind of like evoking that sense of old school television. So those are the things that I kind of was like, okay, this is what we're looking for. We're trying to do in that scenario there. So like, okay, cool. So that's enough for me there to work with now. So like, if we break down now, what I'm going to do now is I'm gonna with the script again. I'm now gonna play what I did, the finished version, just so we kind of get a sense enough that I can break down the thinking behind all these little moments here. Let's see if I can actually fit in every single track on the screen. I don't think I can, because there are a lot. I think overall, maybe like how many? 35 tracks, from 3 tracks to 35 tracks. I don't set out to make it look as complicated as this. It becomes the things like, oh, and this, and let's try this, and let's try this, and let's try this. And then after that, it becomes this wonderful, glorious, colorful experience, as well as listening experience. So yeah, let's play it. And after that, we'll break it down after this.
A samurai who has no master is called a ronin. Ronin, roughly translated, is drifter. Legend has it, the ronin's doomed to wander in penance for an earlier disgrace, and through this wandering recover inner strength. He's not a hungry young apprentice. He's been around, and is now at the crossroads of life, trying to find the courage to choose the right path. But the Ronin can still face battle with the agility of a younger warrior. Now listen to the opening of Konnichiwa, the 2016 LP by London MC producer Skepta. The instrumentation is East Asian. A flash of a blade sends us back to medieval Japan, realm of the samurai.
Looking for me. Konnichiwa.
Konnichiwa. Hello. Good afternoon in Japanese. But this is not Skepta saying hello for the first time. At this point, he's 33. He's been rapping for a decade. But he has been in the wilderness, spiritually, musically. Some were saying the genre closest to his heart, grime, had also lost its direction. It was a long way from the international stage. Konnichiwa is a threshold, the opening of a new portal for British rap and a triumphant return for the man who made the record. From Spotify, this is Decode, where we dig deep beneath the surface of one iconic UK album per series, track by track, line by line, beat by beat, taking a surgeon's knife to dissect and get to the heart of one of the most remarkable recent stories in Black British culture. I'm your host, pirate radio archivist, grime rhythm archaeologist Kayo Chingonyi. Last series, we analysed Dave's psychodrama. This time, say hi to Konnichiwa. This is episode 1, track 1, also entitled Konnichiwa, produced by Skepta with Rags Original.
There we go. I did remember halfway through to actually share the script is there too, but luckily enough, the moments that I did show, like you may have noticed that some of the wording has changed, and that my interpretation of stumbling into the portal is something that I feel like I'm pretty happy with. But there were previous versions, and like you can see, for example, before this being the final version, I made Kaio's voice sound a lot more like it came from a television.
A samurai who has no master is called a ronin. Ronin, roughly translated.
But there was a bit of a
drifter.
debate as to how present Kaio's voice is, especially for episode 1. You know, we want to have a strong start. I personally didn't think that we needed. I was personally for the TV voice, but you know, this is the fun of doing these kind of talks, because I can kind of show you what I wanted to do, and sometimes that doesn't happen. But that it's okay. It's okay. I'm very happy with the rest of with all of this actually. And to be honest, it's not a part of the simplifying of the sound design is knowing when to let go of ideas as well. But yeah, you can see that there's a volume automation. Some things also have panning situations going on here too. But the idea, for me, if we're keeping things simple, it's making sure that, for example, the narrator that you have, the presenter narrator, is always in the same track. I have worked on many collaborations, including with my day job, where it is not done. And you save so much time. You know where everything's coming from. If you've got Kaio in this track and music in these tracks here, for example, if you hear something that sounds weird, okay, I hear music where I'm not meant to hear music. Of course, you will go to the music track. I know it sounds like a very simple, maybe obvious thing, but in terms of your own peace of mind and the complicated nature of some of your mixes that you may do, this really does save an hour sometimes. It's like, I hear a bell. Where's this bell coming from? I don't know, because I didn't organize in that way. So that's one thing. There's also something to say on making sure that your EQ is set consistently. I have a similar type of compression as well, and that also is something that helps with the volume staying consistent that way. My approach conceptually is that Kaio's voice is the thing that we want to hear, because he's the one that's holding our hands, telling us this story. Everything else is working around that. Of course, there are times where the script and the music and the sound effects comes in, and of course you want that to bubble, but everything is sitting under or wrapping under Kaio. A nice little tip that I can't remember who told me, or maybe it was a YouTube video, but mix at a low volume and you stay at that volume. So whether it's on a studio monitor situation or whether it's on your laptop, if you are setting your volume to a particular volume, like say for example, here's the volume thing here. No, actually no, I'll use a bigger example so I know that everyone can see this. The red fader here is at -8. If it's -8, always at -8. And if your computer yourself, the computer itself, you set that at a level 2. So if something's quiet, don't boost your computer volume up. Focus on bringing up the sound that's quiet in the mix. Because if you boost the computer headphones, you're deceiving yourself to think, oh, okay, I made it loud enough because I put the volume up louder. No, stay true to the setting of the volume, both in the mix and in your computer, and fix the quietness that you hear, for example. And if things sound good at a low volume, when you do finally boost it up, it will sound amazing at a high volume. That for me has really made a difference in my mixes, whether it's music or whether it's sound design. Pick a volume. If it's at 50%, keep it at 50% for the whole thing. If you come back, close the computer, change it to 50 to 90 to 20, you open up your session, you remember it's 50%, and keep it that way. It's the same thing with whatever gain volume that you put on your clips. This is at 23, for example. Because you can see that there are different colors. So there's one take originally, which is 1833 decibels, and the retakes are in blue are at 23. So for me, it's just like, okay, cool. To be consistent, for it to sound all balanced, blue 23, orange 18. Little things like that just mean that, again, the narration is the main thing that you want to hear, especially for audio. That's the main thing that you want to hear. And then after that, when it comes to like maybe like another question I get asked often about the music, for example, is like, when is it too loud, or how do I know it's loud enough? I think my favorite answer is to not mix with your eyes. And it seems like, of course I'm not mixing with my eyes, I'm listening to it. But if I am looking at the volume curve here, for example, and I'm just going to put it down just a bit so I can talk over it. I'm seeing
British culture,
the volume curve going up, and it's loud and everything like that. I'm like, your eyes will then trick you to think I'm imagining loudness. But if you close your eyes, if you look away, quite often now the way I mix doesn't look like I'm working at all, because I'm playing a game on my phone whilst listening, and which is part of the reason why I love working from home now, because I can do that as opposed to looking serious at the desk all the time, which I don't think is natural. But anyway, I'm doing something else, and if I am, it's the same example like when you're listening to the radio. If you are listening to the radio and there's too long a silence, you're immediately finding the radio like, is my radio off? What's going on? It's the same thing if something is too loud. If it's the same thing if the rhythm of how you're editing speech, for example, is the same thing here. There's a massive gap between these two texts, and these gaps in between are by design. Nothing is done by accident. If I would, I mean, obviously between these two clips, for example, I'm sure Kayo comes. Oh no, okay, no. In this case, Kayo does come in. Oh no, Kayo in the original take comes in a bit after where I put him in my mix here. Obviously here, there's a gap because there's some sound design going on there. But my main point is that there's a difference between making these two clips coming at the time that they do now, as opposed to a bit further back, basically, because it's by design. It's the rhythm and the flow of how you want to do this. You know, I'm in my head, I'm imagining Kayo in a really cool lecture hall who has all the high tech gear to kind of demonstrate this essay on this track one's talking about Skepta, for example. So how would I want that to be heard and felt informs when I make the difference between talking, pause, and talking, pause. You know, that kind of like, those two rhythms are two things that evoke two different experiences. For news, for example, it is talking, break, talking, you know, whereas if it's a slow form art documentary, it's talking, break, question mark, and you immediately, I'm not saying anything, but you're receiving it in a completely different way. So understanding what kind of body, what kind of color, what kind of experience you yourself who's mixing this would like out of this, and like that decision comes from the conversations, talking about the script and talking about this, that those things happen first, and then after that it's like, okay, with what I understand, this is what I'd like out of it. I would say that makes a big difference again of knowing how loud is something, how loud is too loud, is the pacing too slow, is the sound effect too right, because you already know what you want, or as you're mixing you're realizing I want this. And I find when doing a lot of these workshops that before even opening a session, there's a lot conceptually to think about before mixing, essentially. And I realize there's a lot of things that are said that are left unsaid before breaking any of these down. So then I kind of like use the example of like, oh, you want to be a magician, for example. It's like, okay, well, on the last page is all the information that you need to that you would need to make a rabbit disappear. But before you make the rabbit disappear, you need this much. Here are the 999 pages of information to do this very simple trick. And it's the same thing, like conceptually, if you understand conceptually, you know, if you see yourself as a magician mixing this, see yourself as a magician. If you see yourself as an engineer, see yourself as an engineer. Like, you need to embody the role of what you're doing here before even doing anything that you want to do. So I already kind of mentioned already that knowing the references, the cultural references, the of anime, Japanese cartoons, and all these things. I want that kind of rhythm, that kind of texture, especially shogun samurai types of things. You know, they're very solemn and serious. Obviously, they can be quite silly, like we saw in that trailer. But yeah, there's a reason why this feels like an old school thing. And yeah, of course, there are technical tips, like for example, making something sound like it's coming out of a TV. You know, there's some technical things like that with a simple Google. Sometimes as well, that really helps. Presets are your friend, regardless of what you're using. This is Cubase. For those who are curious, I use Cubase Pro to mix these. But what I'm showing you, pretty much every digital audio workstation has essentially. You know, so and every audio workstation has an EQ. It may have a different fancy name, but there's something for you to play with in terms of like the frequencies and making something sound like it's coming out of a TV. So there's that kind of technical side, but you know, you gotta think about the spaces that you're trying to conjure. So if I were to break it down just a bit, where I bring in the atmosphere and the sound effects, I think I can talk over that. So of course there's a television situation going on. I've got the music from
A samurai who has no master is called a...
There we go. All right, so all of this is to illustrate that experience of wandering, which is actually really interesting because I realized that I needed to storyboard this whole scenario before I felt like I knew what I was doing around what Kaio was saying. So that's also another useful practice. Like before, everything needed to be in my head, but I actually needed to write down a bit. It was like, okay, in this scene, we've got the samurai walking. Because of course, we have a wandering samurai, because I know it's a samurai, Ronin specifically, because yeah, Kaio's talking about this, but what is the character of this Ronin? And one example of how this violence sequence, for example, that is coming up around here. All of that, even that kind of like weapon sword sound effect is a very Japanese type of sound, for example. But in my head, I needed to think, how many people is he going to kill? It's, you know, remember, this is a audio, not visual. Do I need to detail every single body falling, or is the sound of just like 2 or 3 sounds of body falling enough? And even the that he does at the end, for me, characterizes like this Ronin is someone that is, I mean, in my head, it was like, he is so offended by the lack of a challenge that he got from his enemies in this instance. It was too easy for him. And that was like a grunt of disdain. It's like, too easy. I could have done something else. I didn't have to add that little color there, but this is what I mean in terms of like storyboarding the experience before. And this is all under Kaio. So like, I'm talking all about this, but the listener upon first listen may not even notice. And that's the whole point. You're doing things that isn't designed to be noticed, unless doing things are not meant to be noticed. It can be appreciated, but your whole thing is to maintain this world and illusion. But I don't want to say illusion because I'm not tricking you. I'm creating a scene for you rather than deceiving you. And yeah, so it's those little things like that you really have to pause to think about, even if it is for because this is a bit more creative, shall we say, and musical. But even if it is for an interview with 2 voices, you still have to think about the pace of the voice, the pace of the interaction, because of course, if you've got 2 microphones and one, there's a, if you have 2 microphones and the way the conversation is flowing, you miss a particular word, or you miss, or something that was said didn't, in the live scenario when you were in the room when it was recording, it felt a bit brushed over. In the post, in the editing scenario, you can stretch time, you can shorten time, you can make it, you can draw it out in the way that makes makes you realize the thing that was said in that interview land a lot more, for example. So there are things that you can manufacture in that way, even if it's so that's like a two-voice interview with something that's a bit newsy, whether it's like a general election scenario, and you are creating a montage of the world before, the country before this leader was elected, and the country now, were there riots, were there protests, for example. Pick your poison, shall we say, but that's the conversation between you and the producers, for example. But once that's decided that this is the color that we're trying to create, it's not now just splashing riot sounds under the text and thinking that's enough. Like in a riot, you hear people shout. There's a rhythm in the riot too. You start to realize there's a rhythm in everything. So there may be sounds of sirens. That's obviously a rhythmic device. You can use that as a transition between one phrase that the narrator's saying into the other. Or if people shouting and there are bins being thrown, or there's a bottle crashing, you can use that as a comma or a question mark or an exclamation mark. You know, if you're trying to convert the whole experience and transcribing it into text, for example, how are you punctuating what the narrator is saying? You know, what the example that I'm showing you is, of course, it's a more creative, relatively abstract thing that I'm making up and creating scenes, but it applies to everything. You know, you got to think about how you are punctuating and illustrating. But yeah, I'm just going to show you, because I saw the time and I want to make time for the questions as well. But I wanted to show you, just to describe a bit of that portal experience too, and break that down just a bit before I stop to open the floor for that. So, oh no, it's a bit further down, sorry. There we go. So we got, let me solo the music too. And that's the great thing about having folders and all these tracks, because you can just solo the folder too, and it does it. Okay, so. So I really enjoyed the fact that I could find a konnichiwa sound in there. It's just a nice little Easter egg. Here's me talking about not finding the sound, but I think I can find it here if I just solo this one. There we go. And it's coming through, it's filtered through a television sound again, so it has that thin, so it cuts through the noise in a way. And for your curiosity, I use this program called Soundly. So it's the word sound and then ly at the end of it, Soundly. Can I make it bigger? No, there's nothing I can. And yeah, this is where I find a lot of the sound. So like the koto instrument, for example. The good thing about this is it has access to Creative Commons, so that like anything that you search like a Google on this app, all the sounds that do come up, the function already means that it's available for you to use. It's Creative Commons. It means that there aren't any, you don't need to credit the person. The author of the sound has already allowed it to be so you can use it. I'm sure that, yeah, I haven't changed the thing, but yeah, it was a search like that. I was like, okay, this is perfect. It's solemn, it's solitary, just like the samurai, and that's what we hear at the end of it there. But yeah, this is just kind of like, so we've got a little sub hit, we've got a little whoosh, we've got a little drone, an airy drone going on in here. And then after that, if we layer that up now with a signal, communications, radio, scanning, you know, this was my interpretation of this portal as we step through a portal, essentially, as we come back into the traditional opener for the Decode series, essentially. And there are a couple of grime sounds as well, because for me, another geeky side of this is that I have grime sounds that were used in this, so I was able to kind of like insert that That is a very unique sound of the genre. And yeah, all my sound effects as well are in here too. So all those nice little delays. It's all subtle. And you can hear all of this kind of like time warping as we're coming out of this portal into what is the theme music of the podcast. And it continues like that. So like we're out of the world of the samurai and we're into the world of Kaio and talking about Decode. Yeah, that is essentially, so like I think using this mix as an example, I've hoped I've dropped a couple of useful tips in that way. I can talk forever about these things, and but I'm realizing that I want to make time for questions to help you answer specific things. So I'm gonna pause there and see what happens. Okay, cool. Great, I see your question coming already. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Vida. I'm just going to read the question out loud and then answer it. I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about the storyboard for sound design. How do I do it? So the story, a short answer for that would be that I started off with the scene, the atmosphere itself. So for me, going back to at the beginning, wandering is like, okay, with the script as a lone samurai, kind of like the drifter, the wanderer. What evokes that sense of wandering and drifting for me was the sound of the mood, the space, the location, the geography was a mountain, a high mountain, ice, wind. That's very solitary, very survival type of, a samurai is a very gritty character in that sense. Or the samurai that I wanted to characterize is very gritty. So I went on with that. And then after that, the footsteps, the type of footsteps, are they heavy? Are they tired? And again, the way I'm kind of leaning a bit on what Kaio is telling me there he sounds a bit weary. He sounds a bit tired. He's extremely deadly and serious, and he's looking for a real challenge. So that kind of like approach there. And then after that, when again using the sense of transcendence. So I was using these kind of cues as checkpoints to make sure I get to them. So the wandering leads to enlightenment. And that's also why I think I chose the mountain scene, because quite often transcendence and mountains, Buddhist, a lot of religious motifs have that going to the mountain to find that realization. And then I thought you're interrupted now. And in my head, this is like, okay, these are brigands that live on the mountain that rob travelers, for example. So I really needed to give that person a character, and because knowing that this samurai, don't want to mess with the samurai, I wanted to give him as many enemies that sound reasonable in audio, for example. And then when he was done, that grunt there, it's just his iconic thing. That is, if I were to create a podcast around the samurai, then that would be the thing that you look out for every single time, because that was his thing. But yeah, I hope that answered your question there. It's a mix between the prompts that I've got here and the type of samurai that I wanted to create, for example. So replace samurai with sound effects replace samurai for a politician, replace politician for a character in your podcast, for example. There's still little things that you want quite often as well when I'm working on something, and I'm especially based on a character. I love asking people what do they like listening to, because that tells a bit about the type of person they are. And okay, you like listening to rock a bit, maybe that means I'll pick a sound, some sort of music that is rock. Or there's what's your favorite song, maybe what that song is about will help me then character, because if you like singing a lot about happy stuff, then that will determine me characterizing you. Is that someone that likes being in the water as opposed to someone that likes being in the park, and all these little things like that. Little questions, but you can free associate and just have fun with it, and own it as well. Don't be shy. But anyway, I hope that answered that question there.
Thank you so much, Axel. I think we can remind everyone that you can ask questions using the Q&A tool at the bottom, or the chat box, whichever is more convenient, and you can do that in English or Lithuanian. we will translate with no issues. Meanwhile, while we're waiting, I had a question too. Personally, I found your story extremely interesting, and thank you for letting us into such a detailed. Thank you for letting us have this very detailed look and getting to appreciate how detailed and thoughtful the craft really is. I found that incredibly interesting, and I thought if you have any tips or ideas for keeping the balance between the details and the very, very tiny small things that go into audio and versus keeping the big picture and coherence of the entire piece as a whole.
That's a very good question, and something that I wrestle with all the time. So there's no like neat answer in that sense. I think it depends on the final thing. So I'm always thinking about the bigger picture, shall we say. And in that bigger picture, such as, I'm going to use this as an example, this whole bigger picture here, you can see that really the heavy sound design, yes, the sound design throughout, shall we say, but the heaviest is at the beginning. So to me, then I'm like, okay, everything else can be a relatively light touch, but the details and the impressions, I'm going to have the most fun in the opener there. And that already determines everything else. If I've listened to the whole episode, I'm like, actually, halfway through is the thing that I want to bring to life with the details there, or I'll do that. But essentially, I don't think, especially when I'm working on other people's projects, so I'm brought in, so that if it's my stuff, this is a slightly different answer, but with other people's stuff, I don't think I can do it all because I'm dealing with other people's expectations. And when I mean by doing it all, I mean like, okay, I want to add color here and sound there and do this and do that. And someone maybe like, that's a bit too much, I would say. I mean, sometimes it happens where it's fine, but it's expectation management. It's like, okay, what's the thing with the time that I have that I really want to make sing? And I will go for it with that way there. When it's with my thing, you know, anything I do, it's like I can artistically justify it and it's okay. But with other people, you kind of have to negotiate around that. And when it comes to like the actual details of like how many bodies do we hear falling, or really and truly, my honest answer for that is like I listen to this 10 seconds maybe 50 times to kind of like, does it sound okay? And the more I listen to it, if it's yes every single time, then great. If it's yes only half of the time, then I'll give it I'll move on to something else. If it's a no, then I'll figure out why. But yeah, sometimes, you know, it's the difference between being detailed and impressionistic. You know, do I need to hear every single body, or is it one body enough for the listener to hear that person's dead? So yeah, it's that I have more questions to your question but those questions are useful prompts, shall we say, to help you answer when it comes specifically to the brief that you're working on.
Another question that I had is that I found this particular example of a podcast very interesting. And I was wondering, what would you say are the main challenges of working with something that is so heavily tied to an audio product of someone else? Because that to me sounds like that would pose certain challenges in itself. I'm not sure, maybe I am projecting my view onto you, so maybe this is something that like what would be one projection then, if I ask more, like, so like, what challenge would you anticipate when looking at this, out of curiosity? Then I can try to. Well, personally, I think, at least I would tend to think that especially when working with musical pieces of people that so many people respect and find inspiration and admire, I would think that a certain sense of responsibility comes with to, at the same time, pay the due respect and keep authenticity of whatever was created there. So that's what I'm projecting. But
because like I think definitely, like, one obvious example, Skepta, the artist that we're talking about, isn't Japanese, but he's talking about Japanese culture. I mean, like, the first track is called Konnichiwa, for example. So already I am not going to, the script itself, the thoughtfulness in the script is already done, so I don't need to worry about that. But in terms of like the sounds of like even the koto, I'm going to call it koto, that traditional instrument, how am I not using that in a stereotypical way that sounds like, oh, Japan, problematic use of the figure? It's like, no. So it's finding what feels like a caricature and what feels right, shall we say. I'm not going to get that right all the time, which is why there are like 10 other people on the team that hopefully can check me on that. But that would also be a counterpart. It's like if I get it wrong, or if I'm worried about something, I will express that that's the thing. But I think with this genre specifically, for me with grime, I'm really proud of this genre, and more so now because it's becoming a lot more popular in always getting the recognition that it deserves as a craft, as opposed to something that's silly or just like extremely linked to crime, the same way that hip-hop is associated in that kind of way, like that. So for me, I'm like, I'm gonna own this, I'm gonna make this sing, I'm gonna add my own type of interpretation to it too, because I grew up with this. So that was kind of a big deal in that sense. But I guess the way that helped me push through is just like, I want to have fun with it. And if not having fun, if I'm not having fun with this, then what am I not doing that's making me enjoy this? And if I'm not having fun, then the listen definitely isn't having fun either, and you can tell. So yeah.
Thank you. And while we were chatting, another question came in. It's a sweet message, but at the end, the question is, how do I learn how to do sound design? What's the best way you'll recommend to learn and be able to do what you're doing?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. I'm gonna start off by saying you don't need the flashiest, most expensive stuff to get into it. In fact, if you think that you don't rush to get that, because if you don't know what you're doing, it doesn't matter whether it's £50 worth of audio equipment or £5,000 worth of audio equipment. It doesn't matter if you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what you're doing. So work with what you've got. If you've got a computer and if you've got something that edits audio, and I really mean that edits audio, it doesn't have to be a fancy thing, or it doesn't need to be fancy. It's just like, what am I trying to do? Because like the best way to answer that is how I got into it, is I liked music. It took a long time to afford a microphone, but I used my laptop as a microphone. It didn't sound great, but I still felt like, let me use that to my advantage. So like, how can I work with that sound to make it sound like it's meant to sound that way? So it's like, yeah, I've got a cheap microphone, but it's meant to sound cheap, for example, and that informs my art and my practice in that way to work with that. So the poems that I read, I made it sound like it came out for a phone, and it kind of worked. You're never going to hear it, but it kind of worked. It helped me refine the craft of editing, for example, how to fix sound. A lot of these things were kind of like self-taught. I did go obviously to uni to learn how to write music for sound, television, and games, but so mixing in an audio session wasn't new to me. But I also had friends that needed music, or I was then doing sound stuff, but I didn't know it was sound stuff. It wasn't until 4 years ago really that when I was called a sound designer, I was like, oh wow, I guess I'm a sound designer, shall we say. But the title was never there. So I feel like if you're interested and you are familiar with the audio or the craft as a whole, then find what interests you about it, or what excites you about it, and then do it. Is what excites you the fact that, because I see that you have a DJ background, for example, and I find that finding the right track for an audio moment, for example, is a very DJ-like thing, because you have to read the room and match the energy, and if you pick the wrong track, you'll bring on the next DJ, for example. If that's something that you enjoy doing, then find tracks for your own personal use first, to kind of be like, okay, like find a poet, find a storyteller, record them, and sound design that. If that's a way to get your confidence that way, do that. I think the best way, is Issa Rae, the director Issa Rae, said, like, think horizontally. Who's on your level that needs what you want to do? If you want to sound design, is it a filmmaker that's doing something? Do you know people that anyone with a microphone has a story to tell? Even if it's getting your mom to record something to tell a funny story about you as a child, work on that. How are you gonna, everything that I just showed here, like, what are the sounds that your mum was talking about? What was the sounds that your friend said was really funny? I was like, okay, cool. I don't have Soundly, I don't have the money, but I have a phone and I can record my journey on a bus, for example. And you can use that as a bed to then layer your tracks to talk about that really touching story. And then after that, yeah, share it to people who care, share it to people whose opinion you value, share it to people who you think may not like it, and see what they have to say, because I find it quite interesting most of the time when people who aren't in the correct practice, what they say. Again, I'm gonna use my mum because she knows nothing about what I do, but how she responds to it is like, oh, I'm doing something because she listened to this 5 minute thing and she wasn't being nice about it. She wasn't like, okay, I'll listen to what my son has to do. It's just like, I played it and she was into it. I'm like, yes, because that means that I'm doing something there. I'm engaging in a way that isn't audio thinky, producer thinky kind of way. So like, yeah, find what excites you about it and do it more. Build that confidence that way. Get the feedback that you need that way. And also as well, to be honest, I mean, yeah, like I'm about, my social medias are there too. So I may be busy, but I will try my best to have the time to thingy. So to at least listen to something, or I will tell you when I can, or if it's easier to have a conversation. Yeah, so yes, I'm busy, but always try. There are people also as well that are out there who who you do admire. Give it a shot. Say hello. I'm working on this, and would you spare the time to listen to this, even if it's just like a sentence or something? I find that people in audio are very generous with their thoughts and time. So yeah, more so than music and film. So I think you're in a good spot if you want to try. And there's also, anyway, I will, what can I do? There's also a link. Actually, no, I'll share the screen about it too, because I think it's, I recently just retweeted this. I'll find the link and I'll send it in the chat for anyone who is in there. But it's this. This is a really good resource that recently came out that I think is extremely useful for everyone who wants to get into it. Talia is an absolute legend for doing this. So I sent the link in the chat. Take a screenshot of this if you want as well. Find this person's thread too if you want to, or Agnė, maybe you can copy and paste this link and send it out to everyone who joined this group as well. Up to you. But yeah, this is also a really good starter pack.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This is great. Thank you for sharing. And overall, we're coming to the end of the session. So wow. I want to thank you once again, Axel. It was great having you. I found personally the session very enjoyable and very interesting. So I'm sure the audience did too. Thank you for your answers. And again, thank you for letting us into the craft. I don't know, I think this is such an awesome opportunity to see how much attention and energy and detail goes into something that for us is just 10 seconds, but for the designer is, a whole universe.
Oh, yes.
So thank you so much for that. And for everyone as well, the session is being recorded. So we will ideally post it on the website, so you can come back and check something out again if you want to. And yes, so for several closing words of the session, I want to remind you that all of the information about the upcoming sessions and the past sessions of the conference, both this year's and last year's, is on the festival's website, banguoya.lt. So you can check all of the details there. You can find recordings of past sessions. Also, you can find the information about the upcoming events. Today in the evening, we still have 2 events awaiting for us that are happening in person in Vilnius. So if you have the opportunity to join, please do. One of them is a conference session, and at 9 in the evening at the Opera Social House, we have a listening session of some works from the program, but also works from the mentorship project that is part of the festival this year. We will listen to the results of the creators who worked on audio stories and audio works. So that should be awesome. If you have the opportunity to join, please do. And also a quick announcement that the session that was supposed to be happening right after this session at 4:30 Eastern European time is cancelled, unfortunately, but it will be recorded later on, and we will share the link with everyone who has registered for any of the conference sessions. So once again, thanks to all of the people who joined. Thank you for your questions. Thanks again to Axel, and hopefully I will see you all soon. Take care.